In John chapter 13, Jesus has just gathered his disciples and has long desired to spend his last night with the men that he loved. And we see in this chapter that Jesus has gone up to an upper room, and I am standing in the same place that Jesus would have been. This place is a crusader place now. The original place is gone, has been destroyed. But up on the western hill of Jerusalem, there was huge villas where all the rich people lived. And Jesus had friends that helped support his ministry. And so they would live up here in Upper Jerusalem where all the nice houses were. The wealthy had upper rooms. In the first century, there would often be your living space and living quarters. And then the upper room would be a special space for special guests, special feasts. And this was the place that Jesus spent the last night with his disciples, also known as the Last Supper. And in Jewish culture in the first century, they would eat around a U-shaped table, a low U-shaped table. And the servant would come from the inside and he would feed everybody that was seated around the table. And the way that you would eat in the first century, many of us have seen the Da Vinci painting of everyone seated at a table all on one side. That's not the way that Jesus had the First Supper. In the first century, what they would do is you would come inside, you would wash your feet, and from walking in the dust, open-toed sandals, to come into an important feast, you would have your feet washed usually by the servant or the slave of the house. And as the people had their feet washed, they would come up to the table and they would recline at the table. And the Bible says that they all reclined together, and you would sit on your side like this, and you would pull food. You would dip in all the different dishes that were around the table. Some would pass plates around, and they would all sit stacked like this all the way around the table. That way everyone could hear each other. You'd turn your head if you wanted to talk to somebody behind you. It was a very intimate, one-on-one, but yet group-oriented way of connecting with people. So Jesus now has taken his place as the special master of the ceremony, so to speak, as he's the master of the feast, which was usually the second person in. There'd be one person sitting behind Jesus and one person sitting in front. And the Bible says that John, his disciple who wrote the book of John, was sitting in front of him. That's why he was able to lean back and listen to Jesus. They had very one-on-one conversations. But Judas was actually sitting behind him, behind Jesus. And when Jesus goes around and says, one of you will betray me on the last night, they all start asking one another, is it me, Lord? Is it me, Lord? Is it me, Lord? And that's why when Judas says, is it me? Jesus can lean back and go, it's you, without alerting everyone else. And it says from that moment on, Judas got up and left. And he left this spot to go and get the 600 soldiers to come and arrest Jesus. And so we see Jesus with all of his disciples' dirty feet sticking out all the way around this table, this U-shaped table. That is why Jesus, it says in the ultimate act of humility, takes his outer coat off, puts the garments of a slave, of a servant, and wraps it around his waist, and he goes around and he cleans the feet of all his disciples. And imagine the disciples who have just gotten done arguing about who's going to be the greatest, who's going to sit at the left and the right of you, Jesus, because those were the spaces, those were the seats, the cushions, those were the important cushions of the most beloved and respected of the master of the feast. So they would sit on the right and the left. It was not a throne necessarily, it was the spaces of honor for the person holding the feast or in charge of the feast. The Bible says that he handed bread around, and they all took up the bread, and he said, this is the bread that is going to be broken for you. And he handed the last cup of the ceremony around to everyone, and they all drank of the same cup. And he says, this is the new covenant in my blood. And we call that communion as Christians today, that we remember the sacrifice of Jesus with his body being whipped and tortured and his blood flowing, and the sacrifice of the Son of God on the cross, which will happen just over here from where I am standing. But we see in this picture, just before Jesus gets ready to go up to the Garden of Gethsemane, the love that he has for all of his disciples, including Judas, who he gave the seat of honor at around the table. But now, at this time, Judas has left to go get the soldiers and to go get all the high priests, that the trial for Jesus' life is about ready to begin right now in the middle of the night.